Today in the Multiply podcast, we're talking about 3 dangerous leadership mistakes. Check it out. Hey everybody, welcome to the Multiply podcast. My name's Jared.
My name is David.
Good to be back with you guys.
Yes. We are. We just finished our 10 episodes on the characteristics of a healthy church, and so now we're moving into new waters.
New territory.
New waters.
It's scary.
New waters.
We don't know what to expect.
We're diving into new...
There's sharks in the water, but we're doing it.
Are you a Shark Week fan?
I don't watch any of it, but
Same.
I do think it's kind of cool.
Yeah, I love the idea of it,
Yes.
and then I never watch it.
True fact about me, my number one fear is sharks.
Really?
Yes.
I thought it was missing the rapture.
Well, that's my number one spiritual fear. Yeah.
Sharks.
Yeah.
I guess if I was in the water and there's sharks around me, it would be my number one fear, but I'm never around sharks. So to me, it's not really a fear that I ever think of. Like if you were to say, what are your top fears? I would never think of sharks because I'm never going to be near sharks.
Well, I didn't think to list disapproval as one of the top fears. I should know it would be yours. But no, I mean, listen, they're silent. They can kill you. You're in their territory. Now, it doesn't keep me out of the ocean. I still love the ocean, but I'm always hearing that didn't. Even when I'm in my pool, I hear it sometimes in my head.
Well, that's a problem then.
All right, well, we're back. We're excited. What do we got going today, Dave?
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about leadership today, and there's a leadership event that happens every year called the Global Leadership Summit. And this year, you and I are both keynote speakers, which is pretty awesome.
It's pretty sweet. Yeah, they heard about the Multiply podcast.
Yeah, so we're going to be up there with Patrick Lencioni and Craig Gershell and those guys. And actually, they're kind of opening for us.
Yeah. It's going to be nice. It's cool.
So hope you guys see us there. Our listeners are like, oh my goodness, these guys are going to be at the Global Leadership Summit. No, we might attend it.
By be there, we mean we've watched it before.
Yeah. The Global Leadership Summit is something that's simulcast all over the country at the same time. Actually, I think all over the world. Yeah. I'm not one of those guys that goes every single year. I have some friends that go every year, and I think I just forget. And it's always in August, so sometimes it's a tough time because you're vacationing or whatever. But by the time you're listening to this, by the way, the 2019 one is already over. But I think you can go back and watch online, and they have a podcast also. Not that you have time for other podcasts because
no, don't even go there. Just stay with us.
Don't bother, and certainly don't look for Ron Burgundy's podcast because that won't be funny or interesting to you at all. But I remember it was 5 years ago. Patrick Lencioni was a bit of a leadership guru, author. You know, I mean, if you don't know who Patrick Lencioni is, just Google him. He gave a talk called "The 3 Most Dangerous Mistakes Leaders Make," and I remember taking notes, and it stuck with me. And I went online and I just kind of found the talk again, and I thought it'd be a good thing for us to focus on today. So. We'll dive right in, and I'll just kind of set us up with the first one here, and we'll go from there. So,
what I think you should do along the way is to admit and share with us when you made each one of these mistakes.
Oh, okay. So the first one is choosing bad co-hosts. So let me tell you about what the first mistake that, and he calls these dangerous mistakes. So they're not just mistakes, but they're mistakes that have implications or ramifications for you and your team. The first one he talks about is leaders who lead for the wrong reasons. And he listed things like notoriety, people who lead because they want to be famous, people who lead because they want money, people who lead for the title, who lead for the benefits of being a leader. And I think even within the church world where you and I lead, leadership has kind of become the focus, the emphasis, the sexy thing to say, like, let's go to a leadership training, let's talk about leadership, let's develop better leaders. And we're obviously committed to it as we're doing a podcast on leadership. But it needs to be said that some people go into leadership for the wrong reasons, with the wrong motivations. And in your experience, what can that look like? How does that impact the way that you lead and the people that you lead?
Yeah, Dave and I just got back from a large conference. We're part of the Assemblies of God, and every 2 years they do a large conference called General Council. And actually, while we were there, it struck me, because we're going to different breakout sessions, and it's all leaders and mostly all church pastors, but it struck me that how easy the temptation to become better at those things is. The motivation is not to just be a better pastor, but it's to be a better leader as you're perceived by other people around you, And I even realized it a little bit in my own heart. Like, I think there's that temptation that as leadership becomes more valuable, more people are writing about it, talking about it. It's like, hey, this really matters, and it does. If we're not careful, the motivation of our own heart is to try to be better at it because we want approval from the people around us. We want to be able to say, I'm great at this. And we forget the original mission of why we got into doing what we're doing. So if it's pastoring, or even if you're in just some other leadership area to help people, to serve your business, like, we quickly forget the mission, and we make it really about a goal to, for a lot of people, and I'd probably fall into this boat, to find approval from the people around us, right?
Yeah, I think leading a church that's growing, that's making news, that's sort of like a mover and a shaker, and I think it becomes the ultimate resume builder in some people's mindsets. Like, this proves my value, my worth, proves why I was selected. It proves why I'm in this position, and that can be a real dangerous place to be, because you kind of mentioned that in our circles sometimes it's like being a great leader is more important or more coveted than being a great pastor.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, when you think of the metrics of a leader and the metrics of a pastor, there's obviously some crossover, and we're not saying that you don't need both, but they are different things. And so if you just say, like, here's some of the top metrics of a good pastor versus here's some of the top metrics of someone who's just a good leader, what would you say some of those differences are?
Well, I mean, when you're talking about a pastor, you're talking about, you kind of bring the God factor in, right? And oftentimes in leadership, you can have leadership without that being a part of it. Mm-hmm. So as a pastor, you're saying, I'm accountable to God, which means I'm accountable to make disciples. I'm accountable to steward the spiritual opportunities that God has given me and the people that are there. Oftentimes, I think in pastoring, and this could be true of leadership too, but there's a lot of little moments that aren't publicized that no one would know about. Even sometimes moments of just you being alone with God. Like, that's one of the things that's very unique, I think, in pastoring and in Christianity, is like, the most important thing is not what you do from a stage, or not what flow chart you drop, but the most important thing is you spending time with God, you knowing His heart and being led by Him.
Yeah, who you are when you're alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for pastors, obviously some of the things that I think of success metrics, of course, is faithfulness to the Scriptures and faithfulness to teaching the Scriptures in a way that is formative in people's lives. Being a presence in the community in ways that are seen and unseen, being in people's lives and being in the messiness of people's lives. And I know that changes a little bit as churches grow sometimes, and that's a whole nother conversation, how biblical or healthy that is. As churches get bigger, pastors can't be in everybody's life, and I understand that, and that's why we equip people to do the work of ministry and sort of reject this, like, professional ministers do all the ministry and the lay people receive all the ministry. So I'm not saying that pastors have to do all the ministry, but at some point, how do you lead people, teach people, disciple people if you aren't in their lives?
Yeah.
How do you do it from a distance? How do you do it from behind your office doors? How do you do it when you're, sort of riding the speaking circuit in other places and only popping back into your church on weekends to preach? I don't have anybody in mind when I say that, but churches can get to that. Leaders can get to that point if they love leadership more than they love people. And I remember James Bradford, who's a pastor in Springfield, Missouri, he said that recently at a leadership training that we were at together. That one we actually did speak at, and because it was a small little thing. But at that one, he said, I'm afraid that we love leadership more than we love people. He might have said, I'm afraid that we love leadership more than we love Jesus. But both are spot on.
Yeah.
And I think some people go into leadership because they want to be known as a leader, but not because they really want to make a difference. I mean, they wouldn't say that, but at the end of the day, they would sacrifice making a small difference not being known as a leader, for being known as a leader and not really making much of a difference.
You think it's more? I sometimes think the greater danger is not people going into leadership for that reason, but people drifting once they're in leadership.
Yeah, it's probably both. I mean, it's probably some people go in, this is a self-awareness issue. Do you really know why you want to be a leader? Everybody knows the right answers. I want to help people, I want to develop people. But ultimately, how you lead reveals why you're leading.
Yeah.
Right? And so if you're leading in a way that's not empowering other people and pushing people forward. I remember in this talk, Patrick Lencioni said, "I'm tired of hearing about servant leadership." And everybody's kind of like, huh? And then he said, there's nothing else. There's no other type of leadership. Like, stop talking about servant leadership like it's one category of leadership. He said all of leadership is basically sacrificing yourself for the good of other people and, doing what you can to see other people win, succeed, grow, be healthy. So to get back to your question, I do think that you can go into it with good intentions, and then just like anything, you get a taste of it. And you start going to these conferences and you start seeing the guys and the ladies who have influence, and then maybe you do something that works, and then you get a platform, and then the next thing you know, you just kind of like sucked into that cycle of like right. influence and power.
So much of it is
status.
About what's celebrated around you. So if you're part of a group of people that take pastors, for example, that the highest value is preaching and teaching the Bible, then you could sometimes care less about leadership, right? It's like, I just want to be the best Bible teacher there is. And but I think to your point earlier, in a lot of church circles now, leadership has become the top goal, the top thing. So I think even what we've seen and is in our circles, and when I say our circles, I mean extended, like you just observe, there seems to be in a lot of ways a less emphasis on teaching and preaching the Bible well, and more of an emphasis on leading an organization or being a CEO.
Yeah. I think that I agree. I think that it's in some areas of even like church, maybe church planting. Sometimes there might be a tendency. I'm painting with a broad brush here, so I'm not speaking. I'm just saying.
Just say the name of who you're thinking. Okay. Just say it.
Yeah. So Jared Berry. Sometimes in church planning, some of the conversations I hear around church planning is more focused on what type of leader they are than what type of a pastor are they, or are they an entrepreneur, are they a mover, are they a shaker, are they a gatherer? All things that matter, all things that are important, and time has proven if you have none of those gifts, you're really going to struggle, right?
Yep.
But at the same time, there's another side of the conversation is, are they biblical elders, according to Paul's writings? How do they manage their homes? Are they hospitable? Are they generous? Are they faithful? Are they self-controlled? Do they have a teaching gift? Do they know how to walk people through suffering? So I think that, yes, sometimes it's just there's this draw to personality and to energy and to passion, and those things are so useful for the kingdom, and I would never want anybody who has those things to think that they should lay those things down. You got to use those things for the kingdom, but you have to also balance it out with really healthy spirituality, accountability, and then a sense of security that only comes from being in Christ, that allows you to lead, not to prove yourself, and allows you to lead not in ways to protect yourself, but allows you to lead from a place of this deep abiding sense of I'm in Christ, and in Christ I'm accepted by the Father, and if I'm accepted by the Father, then it's not your approval that I need. And that's a daily battle, of course. It's not like something you just check off a list and the rest of your life you got it. I mean, every morning you wake up and you battle with this, but I think it's the awareness of it, and it's the people in your life who are asking you those questions. And one of the biggest questions you have to keep asking yourself at every season of leadership is, why am I leading? And if I lost this title, would I lose my joy? Would I lose my sense of self? And if I was removed from this position, or I had to step out of this position, could I still be satisfied being a child of God and just influencing the people that God gives to me to care and to love? So I do think that there is a need for a more holistic, broader conversation within even the evangelical world when it comes to church leadership.
Yeah.
So
Let's look at the second one. What do we got?
yeah, so the first one was leaders who lead or who are leaders for the wrong reasons. And then the second one is this. Patrick Lencioni talked about leaders who fail to embrace vulnerability. I think another word we could use there is like transparency. And let me just off the bat ask you this. You're a pretty transparent leader. I know that's been your style. And you've...
I share anything and everything.
Yeah, some people would say TMI.
You've been hearing that from my wife, haven't you? She's like, shut up. She
said, I don't want to say Jared's too transparent, but his initials are TMI. In your experience, and you are a transparent, accessible, vulnerable leader, especially with the people that you pull close to you. What do you think keeps leaders from leading in a way that's transparent? What do you think keeps leaders from being honest and real?
I think it's insecurity is the biggest one. I think there's this perception that, especially pastors, so pastors are the moral example to every person that's in their church in every possible way. Therefore, what they have to do is shield people from seeing any sort of real flaws. Mm-hmm. And by real flaws, I mean they'll share a little anecdote in their sermon about, the other day I spoke to my wife harshly, and and like that's the example of the worst thing about them or something like that. Mm-hmm. And their perception is, I'm helping everybody because I'm insulating them from, or I'm painting a picture of myself to them that will be helpful, that they can achieve towards or strive towards being. But I think it actually ends up really hurting them, because in our culture and time today, I think authenticity is one of the highest values. And in the church world, I think people relate and connect to a preacher that they feel like is authentic, or a pastor that they feel like, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
And so I think the insecurity of, if they really knew me, they won't follow me. If they really knew me, I'd be giving them a bad example, or I can't really share my struggles with them. And of course, there's, you don't share everything, obviously, but
TMI.
In the attempt to, I think pastors usually are on the way low end of not sharing enough about themselves versus the other side.
Craig Groeschel is a pastor of a small little church in the Midwest. He's got a little podcast. You probably haven't heard of it. Not that you have time for other podcasts, but he always signs off on his leadership podcast by saying something like, I'm going to butcher this, but basically the idea is be yourself, because people want to follow a leader that's real more than they want to follow a leader that's perfect.
Yeah.
Because first off, everybody knows nobody's perfect. So even if you can somehow bring across this sort of vision of being perfect, this facade, people know you're not. But people want to follow somebody who's real. And I think people emotionally connect with people who are real. And following leaders is an emotional commitment, not just a cognitive commitment. You got to trust that person, love that person, want to be on the journey with that person.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that there is this level of transparency and authenticity. And I know that, especially, I'll just use the example of when you're preaching a sermon, because that's what I do a lot. When you're preaching a sermon and you're really going after something in the text that reveals something in our hearts, one of the best ways to help people put their guards down to actually hear and receive what the Spirit might be saying through that scripture is to be open about, like you said, in a real appropriate level, and we'll talk about that in a minute, in a real way, to say, this is where my struggle is, and I know this struggle well, and here's how God's helping me through this, and here's what it can mean for you. And I think it helps people relax and go, okay, first off, as a leader, you're doing yourself a favor, because the last thing you want is people who think you're perfect, because then if you struggle, fall, mess up, it's going to be extra devastating, right? But it also invites people in. Now, you said when you were talking, Mr. TMI himself, that you can't share everything. It's interesting because in the context of this talk that Lencioni gave, it probably made more sense. But like an exact quote basically is, he said, there's no such thing as being too vulnerable. At the same time, I remember reading Andy Crouch's great book on leadership a couple years ago called Strong and Weak. And the premise for his book is that there actually is a unhelpful, even detrimental level of transparency for a leader. And he used the example of like the president of the United States who gets briefed every day on crises that honestly average Joe doesn't want to know about. Like there's things happening in our country right now that you and I, we probably don't even want to know that they're possibilities. And what Andy Crouch says is essentially when you're so transparent with issues that only you ultimately can do something about, you put a weight on the people that you're leading that they can't, not only can they not carry it, not only should they not carry it, but because they can't do anything about it, you've actually done an injustice to them by putting that sort of weight on them. So for a pastor, for a leader, let's say a pastor is really struggling with something like depression. For him to every week after week come into the church and say, always talk about it, always focus on it. At some point, people are they can't do anything for him. They're not trained counselors. I mean, yes, they can pray for him. So there's a level of accountability that can actually be harmful to the morale of the church and to the effectiveness of your leadership. But then there also has to be an outlet for that transparency at the same time, right?
Yeah.
So how do you navigate that?
Well, that's a very complicated issue.
No, just give us a little soundbite, please.
A lot of it depends. Like to use your example you just gave of the depression, like I'm thinking in my mind initially, okay, well, it really depends on the relationship he has with the church and the group of people he's preaching to.
Yeah, well, let's say it's maybe self-doubt. Like they really doubt themselves. Maybe that's because depression's a clinical, I mean, these all can be clinical issues, but depression's kind of a loaded one to talk about.
Well, so we could take any issue, right? And I think there's some factors that play into it. Number one, who's your audience? If you're going to guest speak at a church, that's totally different than if you're a 15-year veteran pastor at a church where they know you and trust you. You've built up equity. I think the more equity you have built up relationally, it does allow for more vulnerability because the people are not concerned with your vulnerability. Like they're not concerned with your struggle as if, oh, he's going to leave. Oh, he's not going to be able to handle it. He's abandoned. Like you've built up over the years. And that's very different than if you go guest speak somewhere or if you're at a church for, a month or something like that. So I tend to think the level of vulnerability goes up with the level of relationship equity. And that's true of friendships. Like I'm way more vulnerable with my close friends than I ever would be with, certainly random strangers or even like, average friends.
How does a close friend of yours move back towards random stranger status so it's not
You can't not hear the things that I've told you, okay? That ain't going to happen, so.
Yeah. I think that I think there's a tension to navigate here, right? Level amounts of appropriate levels of transparency. So I'll just give you an example. Let's say I have a real heavy concern about the finances at the church. I need to be fully transparent with the board on that. I think that's not a place to kind of, be a tough guy and be like, oh, we got this, don't worry about it. Because they're looking at the numbers, and ultimately they bear the weight of responsibility. They're trustees of the church, so they have choices to make. But if I get up there week after week and be like, man, we're really, I'm so nervous about our finances, there may be an appropriate time to challenge a church and say, we got a need. We got a real challenge before us, and thank you for those of you that are faithfully giving. And if God will stretch you to give more, this is a great strategic time, needed time to do so. There's a way to do it, right? So I think vulnerability, I like what you said about as far as like sort of how long have you been somewhere, how much relationship do you have? And I also think vulnerability narrows the further you get out from your inner circles. So I think there's a level of vulnerability with those who bear the relationship the most and the accountability and the responsibility for whatever you're leading. And then as you start to get out, like I would never go greet a visitor at our church for the first time on Sunday morning and just start saying, hey, I'm the pastor, and man, I really have a temper sometimes. It just really scares me.
Sure.
Really makes me nervous how angry I get at Jared sometimes. But I need to say that to somebody.
Well, there's also a way of being vulnerable that's not creepy and weird, like you just said, right? Like, so take preaching, for example. Preaching is a great opportunity because you can be vulnerable without going over the line. And number one, with preaching, your job is not to preach your life. Your job is to preach the text.
Right.
But you can draw, as you apply the text, you should, I think, be speaking from your own heart and your own life of how this affects. So a few weeks ago, I was preaching on an Old Testament prophet, Obadiah. We were going through the book of Obadiah, and I was talking about, I can't remember the pride. We're talking about pride. And I shared a story from my own life about how this has been an issue. And I use language all throughout, like, so when I'm addressing the crowd, I say, like, some of us in here. So I'm not saying some of you, I'm saying some of us. Mm-hmm. Like, I always include myself in the language that I'm using. You know, we all have this. So the way that you talk and the way that you share, even in my intro story, like, oftentimes I like to tell funny stories, and it will always be self-deprecating, and a lot of times I'll use something that I think will connect. Like, so I'll tell a funny story about marriage, like with my wife and I,
right? That
people, and usually I end up being the idiot of the story, like, look how dumb I am, but everyone in the room can relate, right? And they can go, oh, they do the same stuff we do, like they have the same fights we do. That's not like world shattering, like right. Someone's going to walk away, my pastor's marriage is falling apart. But it does make everybody think, they're not perfect either.
Yeah.
You know?
But if that's your intro every week, then people who are kind of aware will be like, geez, I wonder how Pastor Jared's marriage is going.
Really?
Especially because when you tell the stories, Jen just sits there and crosses her arms and shakes her head and mutters under her breath.
She yells at me so bad when we get back in the car.
Leaders who fail to embrace vulnerability, one of the things that, he said the idea, like, don't let them see you sweat is not a good, let them see you sweat. Let them see you feel the weight of the decisions that you're making and be appropriately vulnerable. So I think we could talk about this more, but let's keep going.
Yeah. All right, number 3.
So the quick summary, leaders who are leaders for the wrong reasons, leaders who fail to embrace vulnerability. And the third one is a lot like the first one, actually, but it's the idea that we make leadership too important. There's the idea that we wrap our identity. This is a gospel issue, which we've talked a lot about, the idea that what is your identity? How does your identity form your mission? So if your identity is I'm a successful leader, then your mission becomes, basically be successful at any cost, at all cost. And one of the things I remember he said in this talk that was really, I think confronted the audience and myself is he said, at times you need to ask your family, ask your spouse, ask your kids, do you think that my job is more important than you are?
Ooh.
Or do you think that the health of this church,
that's a risky question,
the growth
right?
of this, well, it is. I think I think some family members would love the opportunity to tell you what they think, and some would always dodge it, right, based on the personalities in the room. So I actually was thinking a better question, or if you have people in your family who tend to just be very supportive and encouraging and wouldn't call you out on it, I think a better question would be something like this: hey, can you help me out? Give me one example of something I do that might make you feel like my job is more important than you are. So now you're not asking to answer the question. You're assuming that there's something you already do, which I'm sure there probably is, and you're giving them permission to say.
Very vulnerable of you.
Well,
practicing number 2, I see.
Yeah. Practicing a number 2.
Yep.
A number 2.
Yeah. All the middle schoolers listening to this, you'll love that.
Yeah. If there's a single middle schooler listening to the Multiply podcast week after week, we would love to interview you.
Yes, we would.
Because you're probably a fantastic little leader.
Yeah. I love that.
Talk a little bit about this, the idea of making leadership too important. I do feel like we did talk about this the first time around, but slightly different angle. This is less about motivation, and this is more about identity.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a constant struggle. If you don't realize this is a struggle for you, you probably just haven't really realized it, because I think this is a struggle for anybody that's in leadership. And to your point, you said this is a gospel issue, which I interpret that as meaning this is a daily issue that I have to take before God and lay the gospel over my own heart, because my motivation so easily gets distracted from what it should be to other things that it's not even funny how fast it happens. Mm-hmm. So if I don't every day go to this, and I don't always, sometimes I forget or get into bad habits or whatever, but daily I need to bring my heart back to this. I need to assess, what am I doing, God? Why am I here? Why am I doing this thing? Because at the end of the day, it's for you, and wherever you want me, whatever you want me to do. And I think that's important. Like you gave the example earlier. If you stripped all this away from me, I will still be just as content, just as happy to serve you in whatever way it looks. Mm-hmm. And I think, Yeah, I think I need that. I know I do, and I know most people do.
I think that's really good, man. I think part of what he was bringing out in this point, now that I'm thinking about it a little more, is he was saying that, like, you know, in our workplace, we tend to create a culture of feedback, or at least we should. And so we get more feedback from our employees, from our peers, from the people that are affected by our ministry or organizational leadership. We get more of that feedback than we get family feedback. It's certainly more intentional and more structured. And he's saying, you know, what matters most at the end of the day, obviously, is who you are in Christ. But also, when you start to create a hierarchy of what matters most, I think you and I, who both have children, at the end of our lives, like, what we're going to look back at and really care about the most is our 20 years from now, do our wives still want to be married to us? 20 years from now, do our children do they love Jesus? Are they following Jesus? Do they know that I love them? And so, the old saying, like, if it's going to matter then, it has to matter now. And when we make leadership too important, ultimately something gets placed on the altar. And sometimes it's being a present dad, being a generous spouse, being a good neighbor. There's all sorts of things that we forfeit when we make leadership the purpose and goal of our lives.
And don't you think, though, as a good leader, our desire should be to lead people into health in their whole life? And so we should want to be an example of that. Mm-hmm. Like, if I'm a business owner, we should, as business owners, want our employees to be great fathers and great neighbors and great husbands and great wives and all that. So I think we have to model that instead of just squeezing the people we lead for everything we can get out of them to a better profit margin or a better Sunday, more services, more small groups, whatever the thing is. We should lead people because we want them to be great people. And obviously the only way you do that is by leading by example.
Yeah.
Sweet, man. Well, that's all been good, but let's get to the real stuff, real leadership stuff. A little portion we like to call David's Eats. Now, you and I just went away together in a totally leadership context.
Yep.
A conference for a few days in Orlando, Florida.
Orlando in August, nothing like it.
Yeah, it was beautiful, sweaty, muggy, hot. But
I had to throw away all the clothes I wore down there.
Thank God. We ate some food. I'd like to hear from that trip.
Yeah.
What was the best thing you ate? I think I know the answer, but I'm interested to hear.
We had Korean barbecue, which was average.
All you can eat.
But even bad Korean barbecue, still, that's a tasty meal.
Yep.
We went to a Colombian restaurant that was pretty good. But I think the best thing.
That was good.
The best thing I ate. Now, I had gone on 3 weeks without carbs and sugar. And we went to this place called Hash House A Go-Go. And there's multiple locations around the country. And they have this chicken and waffles dish. And you and I shared it. You got a hash too. We got separate. We got our own dinners, but then we kind of shared a little bit.
Not weird at all, folks.
No. Oh no. It's all about trying as much food as you can.
That's right.
First off, they brought out these massive biscuits. Now I hadn't eaten bread in 3 weeks.
Smothered in like a honey butter.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. We cut it. They brought us 3 of them because there was 3 of us, and we were pretty disciplined. We shared one, the 3 of us, and then you ate the other 2 at the hotel later. True.
I ate 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, they had chicken and waffles, and for an extra $1, you can make the chicken Nashville style, which just means it's hot. And it's just massive. I mean, I put a picture up on my Instagram story. It's just this massive, 2 huge chicken breasts. Actually, it must have been more than chicken breasts because it was on the bone, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then like 2, my mouth is watering, 2 or 3 big waffles. And it cooked into the waffles were slices of bacon.
Yep.
And then they had fried leeks on top. They had some tomatoes on there, which I know you didn't really like. And then maple syrup. And boy, I crushed it. Then you got this really good scramble with like potatoes,
jalapeno chorizo hash.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. And I got in the car afterwards and felt like garbage. But
Did you really?
But it was worth every single bite.
I felt amazing.
Well,
I felt like a champion. Yeah.
Well, that says something about your eating habits.
That's right. It was great. Hey, everybody, if you're in Orlando, go check out Hash Hash A Go-Go.
Or Hash House A Go-Go. Hash.
We'll see you guys next time. This is the Multiply Podcast. Peace.